Welcome to the short presentation that explains how attachment theory may provide insights into the ability for a healthcare provider to effectively establish a therapeutic relationship with their patients. Over the past 10 years, there has been a strong initiative for physical therapists and other healthcare providers to become psychologically informed. Main and George in 2011 made the case that our success depends on successfully integrating a biopsychosocial worldview. We are trained that an outcome is the result of our treatment interventions, a combination of one or more techniques. While this is true, research informs us that there is more to an outcome than a treatment technique. The provider beliefs, the environment, emotions, patient's beliefs, the relationship between the patient and the provider, and the ways in which all of these contextual factors activate the placebo mechanisms. To improve outcomes, different professions within physical medicine are rapidly attempting to integrate multiple subdisciplines to get better clinical outcomes. In a sense, we are seeing a confluence of science where rehab science is looking to psychology to better understand the multiple factors that affect an outcome in physical medicine. We are essentially bridging the gap through the field of neuroscience. Much to the credit of researchers in the field of pain science and more recently interpersonal neuroscience, we are gaining key insights into how to help patients heal. A fascinating theory within psychology is attachment theory. Attachment theory is a well-established theory of human relationships and personality development. It is an attempt to explain how our social brain and neural networks are shaped by the close emotional bonds that we form starting early in life and throughout adulthood. Attachment theory also attempts to describe how secure relationships early in life provide a foundation for psychological well-being, while insecure attachment relationships early in life can negatively affect psychological well-being and relationships into adulthood. Unlike many theories in psychology that tend to come and go, attachment theory has endured as a solid conceptual framework from which neuroscientists are exploring nervous system's development and emotion regulation. Originally presented by John Bowlby, attachment theory explains how the close bonds that form between infants and parents serve to regulate the infant's sense of security and safety by providing a secure base from which to explore their environment. Bowlby, a British psychiatrist, took interest in the condition of homeless children after World War II. His observations of children's psychiatric disturbances associated with their separation from their mothers compelled Bowlby to seek an explanation. Bowlby observed that infants displaced from their mothers during the war suffered distress. But upon reuniting with the mothers, some children displayed intense clinging to the mother, while others rejected the mother altogether as a trusted caregiver. This was an intriguing observation that he tried to make sense with the psychology of the time. As a psychiatrist trained in psychoanalytic theories, or Freudian methods, which were popular at the time, he began to theorize that there was a biological and evolutionary reason for these observations. There must be something that motivates some children to display intense clinginess, while others completely avoid their mothers upon reunion. This led to the first iteration of attachment theory, which can be best understood as behavioral motivational system, an innate and critical survival process that motivates behavior, similar to the motivation that we have when we seek food when we are hungry. So being hungry would drive the behavior to seek food. The attachment system drives three kinds of behavior. The first is seeking, monitoring, and attempting to maintain proximity to a protective attachment figure. You can see this with a 1 or 2-year-old at a gathering of strangers. The child will often hover around their mother. The child uses the attachment figure as a secure base from which to explore their surroundings. When comfortable at the gathering, the child might be observed exploring toys nearby, or doing so only in the proximity of the mother. If something changes in the environment, like a loud noise or a stranger enters the room, the child might run or move toward the attachment figures, such as the mother, as I have described, as a safe haven, so that if the child perceives a threat or danger, they seek proximity to the caregiver, who they know will protect them from the perceived danger. Interestingly, most non-human animals, in the presence of perceived threat, seek safety by burrowing or seeking cover, while humans and primates seek the safety of others. You don't see a stressed out 2-year-old dive under a sofa to feel safe. They run to their caregiver. While Bowlby carefully documented his thoughts and observations, it was Mary Ainsworth who developed the empirical studies to further evolve attachment theory with the strange situation experiment. The experiment is conducted in a laboratory where researchers observe the reaction of children who are exposed to conditions that would be considered possibly threatening or anxiety-producing for a small child. The experiment is designed to provoke the attachment motivation system to see how a child reacts to the strange situation. The laboratory setting is a comfortable room with toys spread around and 2 chairs. Researchers are able to observe the interactions from behind a mirrored window. The experiment starts when mother and child enter the room. After the mother and infant have settled and the child gets acquainted with the environment and perhaps even starts to play with the toys, a stranger enters and sits quietly on the free chair. After an interval, the stranger starts talking with the mother and after a while starts to play with the child. Then a little later, the mother gets up and leaves the room, but the stranger stays and tries to interact with the child. After a period, the mother then re-enters and the stranger leaves. After a further interval, the mother leaves again, leaving the child alone. After a short period, the stranger enters, offers comfort to the child if necessary, and tries to play with the child. Then the mother returns, the stranger leaves, and the mother and child remain in the room for a few minutes. The researchers are watching for how the child reacts when the mother leaves, and more importantly, upon reuniting with the mother. The anxiety induced by separation is expected. What intrigued researchers is how children behaved differently when the mother returned. Ainsworth and colleagues categorized children based on the different behaviors they exhibited. They identified 4 consistent patterns of behavior and labeled each category. There was a secure group. Children identified as belonging to the secure group quickly adjusted to the room and started playing with the toys. While distressed upon mother's leaving, which makes sense, they were almost immediately calmed and reassured by reconnecting with the mother upon return and were able to resume play. Then there were 3 categories considered insecure. Children categorized as avoidant seemed unaffected by mother's departure. Separation did not seem to elicit a reaction, and upon mother's return, children actively avoided the mother by moving away, turning away, or leaning out of her arms when picked up. Responses to the mother were unemotional and focused on the environment and toys throughout the procedure. Another category was resistant or ambivalent, anxious group. It should be noted that the labels of these categories have evolved since the initial research. Initially labeled resistant or ambivalent, when we talk about adult attachment patterns soon, we will call this group anxious. Children in this group were wary or distressed even prior to separation from the mother and demonstrated very little exploration of play. The child was preoccupied with the mother throughout, seemingly angry or passive. Upon reunion with the mother, the child could not be comforted, but continued to focus on the parent in a clingy manner and did not return to play. And lastly, disorganized, disoriented group. Children in this group acted disoriented or disorganized in the environment in the parent's presence. They demonstrated a complete collapse in behavioral strategies, such as freezing with a trance-like expression, hands in the air. Some rose at the parent's entrance, then fell prone and huddled on the floor, or clung to the parent while crying hard and leaning away and looking away. These experiments have been repeated over time and with remarkable consistency. The other aspect of early attachment research included not just the experimental laboratory observations, but also naturalistic observations where the researchers spent time in the child's home to watch how the mother or caregiver interacted with the child. They were trying to gain insights into the conditions that might explain what they found in the laboratory. The caregiving conditions that were associated with children in the secure group were an attachment figure, the mother or caregiver, who is regularly engaged in contingent communication. When the infant communicated a need, cried, or fussed, the parent responded appropriately with tenderness and care. And when the episode ended, they did not prolong the connection unnecessarily, but rather put the infant down. It was a healthy and consistent rhythm of appropriate responses provided with a sense of acceptance rather than rejection, and a sense of cooperation rather than control. There was emotional presence rather than remoteness or detachment. The caregiving conditions that were associated with avoidant children led researchers to postulate that these behaviors were formed by the child as a defensive mechanism. The parent consistently and actively rebuffed the infant's bid for connection or withdrew when the infant seemed sad. The parent inhibited their own emotional expression and were averse to physical contact and uneasy when it occurred. It is as if the infant learned that their overtures for comfort and care would not work and essentially gave up trying or adopted a strategy of suppression of emotional responses, deactivation, in order to keep proximity. In the anxious group, these behaviors are formed by an attachment figure that was emotionally and physically available, but the availability was unpredictable, leaving the child unsure of what to expect as they communicated their needs. While the attachment figure was not verbally or physically dismissive, their responses were just as insensitive. The parent would also subtly or overtly discourage the child's autonomy, hovering as if to be overprotective, in part explaining the child's lack of exploration. In the disorganized group, these behaviors are formed by an attachment that was both the source of comfort but also the source of danger. Here the child is in a tough situation. The child knows that it needs the parent to survive, but when the child sought comfort from the caregiver would get angry and even abusive, thus creating a sense of fear or terror. Interestingly, in this category, the caregiver themselves were assessed to be fearful, unsure, and often dissociated. It is very difficult for a child to make sense of this experience with an attachment figure and may have a significant impact on the child's development. Interesting stuff, right? Every human does this. We all start as infants. We all have caregivers that we identify as attachment figures with whom we form an attachment. And our parents or our caregivers also had attachment figures that influenced how they do relationships. Attachment theory suggests that the nature of these early relationships will lay the groundwork for how we do relationships later in life. As adolescents and adults, we still have attachment figures that we depend on in times of crisis or need. In adolescence, it may be a parent, but depending upon the health of that relationship, it may instead be a coach or a teacher. In adulthood, our attachment relationships are often romantic partners, but not always. They can be parents, close friends, or significant others. Attachment theory has been applied as a way of exploring how a person does relationship as an adult. The attachment patterns of secure and the three forms of insecure can be examined with valid and reliable self-assessment surveys. By understanding one's own attachment style, one can better understand the ways or the strategies one uses to succeed in a close relationship. How does this apply to the healthcare provider? Before we get into that, let's look at how adult attachment is currently measured and apply it in a working model. Rather than categories based on behavioral observations in children, adult attachment can be measured with a survey. With a series of 12 questions, the instrument measures the attachment orientation on two continuums. If you recall the original categories that were secure and then insecure categories that included avoidant, anxious, and fearful avoidant, it turns out that each of these categories can be reduced down to two main dimensions. One dimension is avoidance, a high or low tendency for avoidance in a relationship. And the other is anxiety, a high or low sense of anxiety in a relationship. Now, each dimension represents two separate domains. The attachment anxiety dimension is an internal model or perception of self and traced to one's belief about their self-worth and the degree to which they will be rejected or accepted by others. The avoidance dimension is an internal model or how we perceive others, specifically the degree to which we feel comfortable with psychological intimacy and dependency on others. Now, it makes sense to consider that the attachment behavioral system does not function within the constraints of absolute categories, but rather on a continuum. Look at it this way. With secure attachment, when reflecting on a close relationship, if one's approach is low in avoidance strategies and low in anxiety strategies, then one would be considered to have a secure attachment style. Adults with a secure attachment orientation have the following tendencies. They're self-assured, direct in their approach to close relationships. They are responsive and resilient. They feel secure in themselves and in relationship with others. Adults who measure higher in the anxiety dimension and lower in the avoidant dimension may have traits that include a sense of self-doubting, anxiousness, or supersensitivity in their dealings with others. The avoidant attachment orientation is a combination of low anxiety and high avoidance. Individuals here can be characterized as self-reliant, generally avoidant in close relationships, and perceived as distant in relationships that involve a certain amount of closeness. The individual with a fearful avoidance style will demonstrate high anxiety and high avoidance. They demonstrate characteristics often associated with personality disorders or psychological disease, and may include behaviors that are unpredictable, self-sabotaging, or antisocial. Some fields of psychology and psychiatry integrate attachment theory into their therapeutic process. It will be helpful to watch how this works with a model of attachment created by Michelintzer and Shaver. Remember that the attachment behavior system is a motivation system. When working properly, it motivates us to seek proximity to another person in a close relationship or an attachment figure, and a means to regulate our emotions in the presence of a stressful situation. Here's how the model works. During a normal activity, let's say you go in for a routine physical checkup with your doctor. If all goes smoothly, no problems. You continue with your daily activity. If the doctor says, "I see something that concerns me in your blood work," this can be perceived as a threat or a stressor. In the presence of the stressor, it is a normal reaction to call someone and share the news. And not some random person, but someone close to us, an attachment figure. Based on the attachment behavioral system, this is how we are programmed to get comfort in times of stress. And so we seek proximity to someone close to us, someone with whom we have a relationship, a romantic partner, parent, child, teacher, another figure with whom we have identified as someone we could depend on to help us calm our stressful response. In our attempt to seek proximity to this person, we evaluate if the attachment figure is readily available, attentive, and responsive. If yes, we get a sense of security, relief, and positive feelings. This calms our stress response and reinforces a secure attachment with that person. However, it also builds trust in the process. We are able to more firmly believe that when experiencing a stressful situation, we can reach out to someone to achieve a sense of security. This allows us to broaden and build our cycle of attachment security so that when we have a future sign of threat, we learn to trust others to help manage the negative emotions. However, if the attachment figure is not readily available, then the emotional stress compounds. Now, at this point, a determination must be made if gaining proximity to a person is a viable option. If not, we engage a deactivating strategy where we decide we cannot rely on someone else and create a mental model of distancing or downplaying the threat. One might perceive future threats as no big deal, as a way of decreasing the need to rely upon others. If seeking proximity to an attachment figure is a viable option, but the person is not attentive and responsive, one might engage hyperactive or anxious strategies. One might exaggerate their symptoms or amplify the perceived threat to gain the attention of the attachment figure. These learned strategies often result in an individual increasing the perception of the threat in hopes of gaining the proximity to their attachment figure. I think this is fascinating. As social animals, we rely upon one another for comfort and security during stressful times. And our perception of threat is dependent in part on the degree to which we have others in our lives that we can depend on. If we have others that are reliable, we learn that we can reliably seek others out. We are able to deal with perceived threats more resourcefully, keeping them in proper perspective, not an overreaction or an underreaction. If we learn that we cannot rely on others, we might downplay future symptoms or threats. We might frame it as no big deal. If we have another who is close to us, but not available or reliable, we might exaggerate symptoms and future perceptions of threat. Cool stuff, right? How does this relate to healthcare and a healthcare provider? Attachment theory has arisen as a prominent framework to explain how patients and providers form a therapeutic bond. We know that the therapeutic alliance is a critical component of a successful therapeutic intervention. The therapeutic alliance is defined as the agreement on the goals of the treatment, the task to accomplish the goals, and the formation of a personal bond, a relationship wherein each is emotionally available and mutual trust is established. Attachment theory is focused on the bond component of the alliance. Both the patient and provider will have an attachment style. According to many researchers, the healthcare provider serves the patient as an attachment figure. The patient trusts the provider and seeks them out when they experience the stress of an illness or pain. The degree to which a healthcare provider is available to the patient depends upon the provider's own attachment style. Patients of any attachment style sense the degree to which the provider is emotionally available. The provider's attachment orientation will influence the way they regulate their emotions as they engage with patients. Providers with more secure attachment orientation communicate in a way that is more open, with greater empathy. It has been shown that providers with an insecure attachment orientation demonstrate less capacity for empathic concern. The healthcare provider's attachment orientation can influence their capacity for connecting with patients, especially those with more serious illnesses. Providers with an insecure attachment orientation may struggle with maintaining an appropriate therapeutic distance, managing the emotional requirements of the engagement with patients in an attuned manner, and negatively impact the patient experience. A provider's ability to maintain congruency by being attuned to their own emotional state and to that of their patients is essential to the therapeutic relationship. It is upon the real-time verbal and nonverbal communication that provides patients clues that inform them of the degree to which they feel safe in the relationship. The attachment behavioral system is an innate emotion regulation device. However, healthcare providers have the capacity to regulate their own emotions to optimize the experience for themselves and for their patients. So what? Well, I believe that being a healthcare provider is challenging. One of the most challenging parts of delivering healthcare is connecting with our patients in a healthcare system that continues to require more. In spite of the many frustrations with the system, we know that clinical success depends upon the therapeutic alliance, which means we have to effectively form a bond or relationship with our patient. In my observation of 30 years in practice, it's easier for some people than for others. By understanding one's own attachment style, a provider can reflect on their experience with patients and the degree to which they are succeeding with patient connections. One may gain some insights into how they regulate their emotions with difficult or challenging patients. Knowing one's attachment style may also provide insights into some of the symptoms of exhaustion and burnout experienced by many healthcare providers. I hope this overview of attachment theory and its application to the therapeutic relationship has been helpful.